All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos, and tonight I want to talk to you guys about Khazaria, a forgotten empire. And this is, as is noted in the title, a sponsored stream. Shout out to our good buddy Pim Orsos. He is responsible for today's stream. Pim is the one who sponsored today's stream, asked me to read a controversial text by Arthur Koestler called The 13th Tribe. The 13th Tribe. And today's stream, then, is we're going to be tackling a very interesting and enigmatic piece of history. You know, I kind of consider myself a connoisseur of the historical. And I was not as privy to the political, to the influence and impact this Turkish nomadic tribe who converted to the Judaism, the religion of Judaism, in the 700s, the 8th century. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. However, I'm quite conscientious and aware of where the controversial argumentations, theories, other speculative constructs that have emerged that could certainly be deemed hateful by the powers that be. So we are going to be very, very conscientious in how we approach today's topic. So I am going to be focusing mostly on the historical Khazarian Empire, the only example of a Jewish political nation state, of, again, these Turkish nomadic peoples. Really, this whole enterprise, this whole process, beginning somewhere in the mid, let's say 630s with the fall of the Göktürk Confederation, and we'll talk a little bit. I'm going to explain a little bit more about this, but I'm going to be focusing on the historical empire and then its sort of collapse within the 13th century, the 1200s, and essentially been forgotten from history. It's in a way, it's been gone. It's no longer here. So, I mean, even the evidence. I mean, again, these were nomadic people, so they had sort of huts, they had tents, they had a different type of dwelling places. So even the historical evidence of their culture is very scant. It's very difficult to find information. A few scholars have tried to tackle this topic of the Khazarian Empire. But what I found so interesting is how important Khazarian Empire was. And there's a Byzantine chronicler talking about the sort of golden seals of the transmission of political envelopes and messages throughout this time period. And he mentioned the 3 gold stamps of the Khazarians as opposed to the Frankish kings and the Persian kings. They used 2 golden stamps. Well, Khazaria gets 3. Well, what is Khazaria? How is it so wealthy? And what's so amazing, I mean, many people don't even know the Byzantine Empire. And so Byzantium's going to play an important factor in today's conversation, along with what was the Sassanid Empire in Persia, which eventually gets conquered by the Arabs, the Muslim conquest of Persia. And then Persia becomes Muslim. And we see the Umayyad Caliphate, eventually they fall to the Abbasid Caliphate, and how this relates, again, to these Turkish peoples north of the Caucasus area. And so where we're going to be focusing today is, again, on the geopolitical and the historical understanding of this Khazarian Empire. Now, this has branched out into, obviously, more controversial arguments. Now, I'm going to be reading sections from this book here, The Silk Roads, as will be very clear here in a minute why it's obviously in there. But then in this book, this is written by Arthur Koestler, is a Hungarian Jew, and he wrote this controversial, now very controversial book in an attempt to do away with anti-Semitism in the sense of arguing that Jewish people are one specific monolithic ethnic community, ethnic race throughout history. Obviously, the Bible insinuates evidences of interracial marriages and the like. But then he argues this whole book then, really the second half is on the Exodus, the fall of the Khazarian Empire, and him taking up questions concerning Eastern European Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, and their potentially Turkic origins. I am not going to get into this conversation. We're totally going to avoid looking into the genetic identity of Ashkenazi Jews. If you're interested in the more controversial aspects of this topic, feel free to get this book and read the second half yourself. And then you can look into the sort of modern genetic testings or argumentation that's been put forth to claim that this is a conspiracy theory. So in the attempts, again, to avoid any censorship, to avoid any recommendations to my channel, we are going to be avoiding the more controversial argument here that the Khazarian Jewish Empire, this has been put forth, this is a speculative theory, again, that's really got going by Arthur Koestler, but other scholars still argue that Eastern European Jews were not Sephardic transplants. Sephardism, the sort of Spanish Jewry that goes up the Iberian Peninsula, they were not Sephardic Jews that made their way over to the Rhine, the major river there in Germany, crossed the Rhine, made their way across Germany into places like Poland and Lithuania and Hungary. The argument that he puts forth is that the Magyars, another Turkish people who then essentially settle and comprise what we can say contemporary Hungary, that they were persecuted by the Pechenegs. They were pushed in their current area, and with the fall of Khazaria due to Genghis Khan in Mongolia and the Mongols, that then the many Jews of the Khazarian Empire fled their way into Eastern Europe. So that is the controversial argument. I'm sure that's what many people are here to hear more about, but we're not going to be diving into that. We're going to be focusing on the historical evidence of the actual Khazarian Empire so we can understand its context within history, how it relates to other empires, its rise, its prominence, its influence, its fall, how that relates to history, and then we can certainly point that there are controversial theories out there concerning the identity of what people call Ashkenazi Jews. The typical argument is obviously Ashkenazi Jews are of Germanic descent. Okay? So that is the official argument. I just want to put that out there just so the algorithm in YouTube knows what the intention of today's stream is. Okay. So this great narrative, I think it's going to be even more fascinating because then hopefully people can use this stream not so much for, going deeper into potential theories, but to have a firm basis, a historical basis on what this empire is and where it comes from. So to begin, we need to understand, again, history. I've talked about how I love history. When you don't know history, when you don't learn history, in a sense, you're a sort of species with amnesia. So Khazaria is, in fact, a real empire. This isn't something, I saw somebody in the comment section here leading up. They said, is Khazaria real? Khazaria is absolutely real. And it's absolutely fascinating how this Turkish nomadic tribe essentially came to dominate a particular region in the world. And so let me show you real quickly. This is the general region. So this is from a YouTube video that's very useful that I am not going to be playing due to copyright purposes. But we can see this map right here. And these rivers are very, very, very important to understand, again, geographical location. So we have the Bulgars over here. Again, what would consider to be on the far left here, modern-day Bulgaria, the Black Sea, right, the Balkan area. And we have the Byzantine Empire that controlled that sort of what would be modern-day Turkey. And then we have the Caucasus region. That would be Georgia. That would be Armenia. What would be considered today contemporary Azerbaijan. And those are obviously people of ancient histories, particularly the Armenians and the Georgians. And so this map that I'm showing you is basically showing you, again, if you focus here, see how there's a big X between these rivers? This is the Caspian Steppe. What we would call the Caspian Sea was actually the Khazarian Sea at one point. And we see that there's this blue haze here is what we would call the Khazarian Empire, the Khazarian Cognate, because they were ruled by these various Kagans. So by the year 600, this sort of region, this central steppe region, was controlled basically by a variety of different peoples, but there was a Göktürk. Göktürk was basically a confederation of 10 tribes. Okay, let me see if I can find that. So here it is, Göktürks. Here's the Wikipedia. It's basically it was comprised of multiple, again, confederation of Turkic peoples and medieval Inner Asia. Now, these peoples basically had, they were called the 10 Arrows. There was 10 major Turkic tribes, and they had basically a confederation that had a foothold across what we would call Central Asia. And remember the Huns, Attila and the Huns. This is all right before this period where in the 400s, the 500s, the Huns are making incredible inroads. And there's certainly questions regarding Attila the Hun's ethnicity. Many speculate Eastern Asian, some, again, they vary. But anyways, this whole Central Asian area was, at the time of the 600s, so Attila the Hun, I mean, we're talking 400s then, so a couple hundred years later, the 600s, this Göktürk confederation falls apart. And as it falls apart, the sort of Central Asian area, you have all these Turkic nomadic tribes. They're all shamanistic, they're pagan. And so this confederation fully falls apart around the 630s, 630 AD. And it's here that a group within this sort of confederation known as the Khazars began to dominate and grow in prominence and basically establish the power vacuum of the western steppes. Again, this area between the Caucasus region, the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea, all the way up to Kiev. And this is where our conversation, the conversion of the Russian people, the Slavic people, is going to play a tremendous and important role here in regards to the decline of the Khazar Empire. So the 630s, we see the Khazars begin to fill this sort of Western power vacuum in Central Asia. Remember, when did Muhammad exist? When does the right of Islam exist? This same exact period. So in the 620s, we have Muhammad. We have the rise of Islam. And so at the same period where we see Central Asia, once a confederate of stable powers, they're falling apart. Now we have all these tribal Turkish nomadic peoples vying for power. At the same time, we see Arabia begin to unify through Islam. And it's become so powerful that it dominates Persia, right? So in the 630s, you have the growth of Muslim Arabia. 633 to 654, you have the Muslim conquest of Persia. Persia was a Sassanid empire. It was a Zoroastrian empire. So you see the fall of the Zoroastrian empire become Islamic Persia, Iran, for all intensive purposes. And now we have this Khazarian force, is this confederation or this consolidation of power, again, in this very, very important region. We see the Don River, the Volga River, the Black Sea, and the Caspian Sea all come together. This is essential. This is the nexus of the Silk Road, of global trade. It's absolutely essential, and this is where the Khazarian Empire really takes on the use of money lending, trading of goods. One of their big ways they made money was taxing people to use their rivers to enter into the Caspian Sea or the Black Sea, especially the Russians, the Slavic people, the Rus. And so so around the 630s here, I'm all over the place. Around the 630s, we see the consolidation of the Khazar Turkish nomadic people in this sort of Western Central Asian area, the steppes. We see the rise of Islam, and of course we have the Byzantine Empire, the Orthodox Christian Empire. So 642, we see the first Muslim Khazar War. 642, the first Muslim Khazar War, of which is a major importance, because if Islam was able to enter through the Caucasus region, they were able to essentially swarm Europe. They would be able to attack Europe, both from Eastern Europe and from the South, and they thought they were going to be able to dominate Christian Europe. Whether it be, you want to call it Orthodox or Catholicism, at this point there really isn't that full distinction. There's the Latin West and the Greek East within Christendom, but the Khazarian Empire, these Khazarian nomadic people who were noted for having red hair, blue eyes, and light skin. This is one of the phenotypes that were described throughout history concerning the Khazars, is that they had red hair, blue eyes, and they were light-skinned. Well, they defeated the Muslims and they held them back. Eventually, they advanced forward. The Khazars then defeat the Magyars, and they defeat the Bulgars in the same sort of central steppe region, and essentially establish their hegemony of this region by the time of the 650s, 660s. Okay, so as we're moving into the end of the 7th century. By the time of the 8th century, we can see the 720s to 737. We see the Second Arab-Khazar War. Well, Islam at this point, now we're looking at over 100 years after the Prophet Muhammad. We see Persia is Muslim, all of Arabia is Muslim, and the Umayyad Caliphate stretches all the way from Iran, basically at the tip, almost India, all the way over to Spain, all the way across northern Africa. So Islam's a serious threat, and it's it's the number one threat for the Byzantine Empire. And whether you're Catholic West or you're Orthodox East, it doesn't matter. The Muslims are on the move. And it was only for the Khazars, these Turkish nomadic peoples, who eventually adopt Judaism. And that's part of our story today, is why did they adopt Judaism? Why do non-ethnically Jewish people make Judaism their official state religion? And we're going to dive into the political reasons for why they would do that, and how it was a sort of meeting point. Again, we can look at this map. They're right in the middle between the Arabians, the Islamic culture, and then the Greek culture. And so what do the Christians and the Muslims have in common? The Old Testament. And this is really the ways in which the Khazarian Empire came to adopt Judaism, is that the Kagan, which is sort of the king, and we'll get into some of this stuff here. I got so many sources and books and things to read, that the Kagan essentially, he saw that the shamanistic, polytheistic religion of these Turkish nomadic peoples was not as unifying nor as powerful as an at an empire level, at a sort of kingdom level. The shamanistic religions were not as effective as a monotheistic religion. And so the Kagan wanted the Khazarian Empire to become monotheistic. And so he brought the Muslims. He brought a Christian bishop. I remember in the evidence in this book it talks about it. And then he had Jews, and Jews were already there. Jews were already there due to the diaspora. And one story has it, maybe we'll be able to read it as I go through this book, is that the bishop talks about, the Jew talks about, oh, well, you as a Christian, you accept all these different things. He talks about Moses and the Torah and the Old Testament. And then he says the same thing to the Muslim. The Muslim accepts the Torah and Moses and the Old Testament. And then he asks them what the Muslim believes and what the Christian believes. And then the Christian starts getting into, well, we believe in the Logos. It's the second person that he incarnated as a historical entity of Jesus Christ. And then that's where the Jew tells the Kagan, you see, they all accept my beliefs, but I don't accept their beliefs. And this was the basis for why the Khazarian Empire then adopted Judaism as its official monotheistic religion, and that only the royal family, the Kagans, the Khazarian royals, were Jewish. But they propagated Judaism throughout the empire, but at the same time, they allowed Muslims and Christians to be there, and also shamanistic, indigenous sort of tribal religion as well. But they were then also convinced that when they read the Old Testament, in a way, they were also these sort of chosen people to a degree. And so one of the controversies that eventually emerged within the Jewish world was that how Talmudic were the Khazarian Empire, because actually they were a type of a heresy for the longest time. It wasn't until about 100 years after they made Judaism their official religion that they got rabbis to come in to start propagating rabbinical Judaism, Talmudic Judaism. They were practicing what are called the Karaites. It's a heresy within Judaism. It's the rejection of rabbinical or Talmudic Judaism and only practicing the sort of Old Testament Torah form of Judaism. This was the religion that they had. That's why you can still find Crimean Karaites. Crimean Karaites still exist. These mountain Jews within the Caucasus region still exist. And they may actually be some of the oldest examples of Jews in diaspora. So, very interesting stuff. Again, as I said, by the 720s to 737, we had the Second Arab-Khazar War. And the Muslims were making real advance. If it wasn't for the fact that the Muslims were also fighting a war front against the Franks over in Europe, and they were also fighting the Byzantines over in Turkey, and they're also fighting the Khazarians over in the Caucasus, they probably would have been more successful. They actually made their way all the way into the capital of the Khazarian Empire and forced the Kagan to convert to Islam, which really, as everybody historically knows now, was not a real conversion, obviously, because he then converts to Judaism just 3 years later. So 3 years later, he makes the official conversion where the empire now becomes a Jewish empire. So by around the 750s, okay, so again, we had the Second Arab-Khazar War, 720 to 737. This is major in history because if the Muslims would have defeated the Khazarians and made their way into Eastern Europe, they would have been fighting the Europeans on three fronts, basically. On the Byzantine front, on the French front, and then on the Eastern European front. So Khazaria is essential to even Europe maintaining its Christianity. It's a very, very important piece of history that I was surprised I didn't know that much about. And that's why I want to share with you guys today. So this in 750, the Umayyad Caliphate, the Muslim Caliphate that was ruling the second caliphate of early Islamic history, the second caliphate falls, or we have what's called the Abbasid Revolution, and the Abbasids then take control of the caliphate, and they are much less expansionistic than the Umayyad Caliphate. And this is where we get the Muslim or the Islamic Golden Age. You see, by 750, we have the Abbasid Revolution, which then reorients the power structure of the Muslim world, in which they become more self-reflective. Instead of this military expansionist project that it was since the beginning of Muhammad, it basically it slows down. It controls its resources, becomes a little bit more self-reflective, and this is where we get all the poems and the Rumis of the world, and the all the astrologers and the Avicennas and all this different stuff is that real golden period, basically between the 700s to the 1200s of Islam, which really then is really Iranian. It's not, the golden age of Islam really isn't that Arab. It's mostly Persian. It's mostly Iranian. Anyways, 740s, we have the official conversion of the Khazarian Empire to Judaism. And they thrive. I'm talking wealth beyond wealth. We have the Byzantine emperor sending daughters to marry the Kagan, of which the Kagan has like 28 wives. And so we see a real interest in the Byzantine Empire to establish friendly relationships with the Khazarian Empire, because obviously Khazars are controlling the growth, the expansion of Islam into the Central Asian area. At the same time, you have the Rus, you have the Vikings, you have the Danes and the Norwegians, sailing these rivers and looting and taking things and even being a sort of nuisance to the Byzantine Empire. And so Khazaria then was great in the sense that they also controlled the Rus. The Rus couldn't get to that central place, that X point. You see where those rivers come together inside that blue haze? It's the Volga, it's the Don, it's the Black Sea, it's the Caspian Sea. This is an essential nexus point just for travel, for goods, for products, for power. And so the Khazarians then controlled the Rus. It isn't until later that the Rus start to actually make ways into the Khazarian Empire that the Byzantines say, I don't know. Maybe we should reorient our relationships more toward the Rus, more toward the Slavic people. This is the 900s. Eventually, you get Sviatoslav, the Grand Prince of Kiev, then sacks the capital city of the Khazarian Empire, and essentially from that point forward, Sviatoslav, Prince of Kiev, sacks Atil in 960. So basically, you have 200 years of Khazarian dominance. Arguably one of the wealthiest empires at this point. You had China, and then in China, it's the Tang dynasty that actually caused this great collapse within Central Asia. As we were talking about the Gokturk Confederation, these 10 tribes that are basically confederated, the Tang dynasty wasn't interested. The Tang Chinese dynasty pushed these people out so far. That's what, and this is a whole scholastic debate on the word Turk or Turkish, or why we call them Turks, and how this is related to a linguistic group, that it goes all the way back to China and the Tang dynasty kicking these people out, which caused a cascade from the 500s later of these Turkish nomadic peoples moving west, all the way from China, where this process then continues. And so the king of Persia, he had 3 seats for principalities to come. It was a symbolic gesture. They never actually came to Baghdad, but he had a seat for the emperor of Byzantium, he had a seat for the emperor of China, and he had a seat for the Kagan of the Khazars, which lets you know how wealthy and how powerful the Khazarian Empire was during this point in history. And so once Vladimir the Great then converts to Islam, the game is over. I mean, Vladimir the Great converts to Orthodoxy. The game is over for the Khazars, because now the entire Norwegian, Slavic, Rus dynamic that eventually they were partnered with Byzantium to fight off. Now Byzantium's now in agreement with them. They send daughters. They marry off their women to some of these Slavic princes and kings, Vladimir the Great. And what in turns happens, the Russian people become Christian, and now Byzantium doubles in size, and Khazaria is now put in an even more difficult point. And this is all after, again, the conversion of Vladimir is after Sviatoslav, the Grand Prince of Kiev, sacks Atil, the major city for Khazaria. So this is basically just a quick introduction of everything that I want to show with you guys today. Again, we're going to be diving into Khazaria, and I really want that anybody who watches this stream to go away to have a very solid basis for the historical trajectory of this Khazarian Empire. The only example outside of the present state of Israel for a politically religiously identified Jewish nation, the Khazarian Empire. So, guys, smash that like. We're going to be diving deeper into this stuff. So, hope everybody really enjoys this topic. Smash that like, guys. A few quick announcements I want to make is, if you are interested in supporting Church of the Eternal Logos and you like what I'm doing, the best way you can support is become a website member. And I have, again, my speech from Montanica on demonic hypnosis is up over at the website, of which tomorrow I'll have my review of the movie The Northman, which obviously, even though the Rus, the whole Slavic, Icelandic thing, that totally even relates to today. So I'm sure in that analysis you're going to get some overlap from today's stream. But that's going to be up either today or tomorrow or Thursday morning. So I'll have another members video up. Also, this Thursday, we have a premium members group meeting. So this Thursday at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, for everybody who's a premium member, we'll be hopping into a Zoom group to chat like we always do. So don't forget, premium members, we have a group meeting this Thursday night. Also, if anybody's interested in signing up for a one-on-one session, you can do so with that link right there. We still have some slots, 2 slots available for this Thursday if you're interested. And also, guys, shout out to Pim Orsols. PIM is the reason for today's stream. This is a sponsored stream, guys. This is a sponsored stream. And so it is PIM. Shout out to PIM, who is responsible for sponsoring today's stream and getting me into this topic for our discussion. So God bless him. And if that's something that you guys would also be interested in, you can also sponsor a stream with the following link. So with the following link, if you have a topic you'd like me to research, the sponsoring of the stream is basically purchasing my research time to prepare for the stream. You're purchasing the hours of which I'm going to invest into the stream. So if that's something you'd also be interested in, please do so. Please do so. So with that being said, guys, now let's just get back to our conversation, the topic at hand, and smash that like. Okay. So I think maybe the best way to begin is to give just a quick overview, historical overview of everything, because I think that's what's most difficult for a lot of people, is just to grab sort of a historical example. So here we're gonna start. This is a quick little video. We're not going to be playing any audio or anything like that, but this is the Khazar Kaganate, right? Because again, they call it the Kagan. And we're going to see this is 651. Remember the years, guys. And that's why it's so important. Remember, 620 is the year of Muhammad. 630s is the year the Church of the East actually enters into China. So it's a long time. This is all right around that same period. So at this same point in history, we have the Tang Dynasty in control of China, allowing Christians to come for the first time. We have the Datin Pagoda, all that stuff over in Xi'an. You also have the massive expansion of the Muslim Empire. And then you have Byzantium, and you have the Latin West doing their thing. And then, so here is this growth, and I'm going to speed this up. We don't need to watch this whole thing, but so let me speed this up to like 1.5. This is the growth of the Khazar Khaganate. And so we see it's right here in this Caucasus region. Don't forget, it's right between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea and the Volga River and the Don River. These are incredibly important nexus points for trade, for products, for the empire's growth. And then we see how they just took over Crimea there in the 700s, right? We're getting ready to approach the Second Arab conflict right there in the 720s to 737. So now this is all through the Second Arab War. Again, it grows a little bit to the north. There. And this is basically now the height of their empire. The late 700s, the 800s for sure. They thrived during the 800s. Now they're basically up into Ukraine. Now they dominated the Magyars and the Volga Bulgars. Because remember, there's the Bulgars that are in... here's the Bulgars, right, to the right, next to the Avars, the left. You have the Bulgars, which established Bulgaria, which were also a sort of pagan group. They almost adopted Islam. And then you had the Volga Bulgars. The Volga Bulgars up here north of Khazaria. So these Bulgars actually get split. And that's where you have the Volga Bulgars up to the north. And then you have the Bulgars that are down here of what is considered modern-day Bulgaria. And so, continuing on here, I just want to make sure that's clear for everybody. Okay, so we see again, the vassal state of the Volga Bulgaria, and then we see the growth of the Khazaria. And as I said, the 800s are basically the height of the empire. Now you're going to see it slowly dwindle down. What you just saw is the Greeks take back some of their land. And now you see recession there on the Southern Caucasus front. And then in the 900s, remember in the 960s is when the Rus, Sviatoslav, the Grand Prince of Kiev, he and his Russians with, I forget how many thousands of ships, they just decide they're doing it. And they set sail all the way through the Khazarian Empire, down the Don, down the Volga, and they just go straight to the capital city. And And so anyways, this is the empire. We see now 960. Now this is bam, 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 bam. It all happens, right? 960. Now we're in 971. Just paused it. But 960, you see everything falls apart because the Rus attack their capital city. However, what's really deceiving here is all of a sudden you don't see that big blue. So you think, oh, Khazarians must be gone. No. Khazaria, these Turkish Jewish peoples, these Turkish nomadic peoples, they stay present in this region. Yes, the empire sort of has fallen, no doubt, but they still reside there. They still live there. And they do that all the way until Genghis Khan, until the Mongol invasion, where the Mongols, they destroy everything in their path. So Khazaria, when the Khazarian Kagans were ruling this sort of central steppe area north of the Caucasus region, it was everybody who, whether they Christians or Muslims or Russians or whoever, talked about how rich it was in foods and fruits and vegetation, honey, candle wax was one of their main exports. So it was an incredibly luscious area. By the time Genghis Khan came through and they cut off water supply, so there was the Khazarian Empire had diverted water in different ways so that they would allow more things to grow. The Mongols shut all that stuff off. They just destroyed it. They would dam up rivers, and so the climate, the geography totally goes to crap after the Mongols, and this is what forced a lot of the Khazarians to flee into Eastern Europe. And that's a fact, and that's also, they flee into Ukraine. Ukraine was Ukraine didn't exist at that time, but what we would consider modern-day Ukraine was a refuge for these Turkish Jewish peoples. And you can still find these people. You can still find these Khazarian Turkish Jewish people in Crimea. And that's where this term, the Mountain Jews, comes from, or the Crimean Karaites. If you look up the Crimean Karaites, you'll find these sort of Crimean, Turkish, Jewish people that practice this heretical form of Judaism, which that actually rejects rabbinical Talmudic Judaism. So they only practice the Torah. They only practice the Old Testament. So anyways, that's where I think it's a little bit misleading here, because these people still exist. They're still here. It's just the empire, as this sort of central nexus of trade and money, it falls apart. It actually is no longer as dominant as it was. And so eventually, once we get here, once the Mongol invasions start, there's literally no evidence of Khazaria that's left. And that's the big thing about this whole Khazarian empire, is how scant the sources are. And that's where we can get into some of the readings that I have for today, is there's only a few sources. You have the Byzantine sources, you have the Arab sources, and you have the Russian sources. Because we don't have anything of these Turkish nomadic Jewish peoples writing about themselves. So everything that we know now of the Khazarian Empire comes to us through basically three methods: the Arab chroniclers, the Muslims, the Christians, both Catholic and Orthodox. A letter that was written by Hasadeh of I'll find it here in a second. There's a Jewish gentleman that was he was in conversation with Kagan Joseph. This Jewish gentleman from Spain, the Sephardic Jew, found out that there was a Jewish empire in Central Asia. He couldn't believe it. And so he asked some Byzantine soldiers when they came to Spain if that was true. And they said, yeah, it's absolutely true. We've seen it. We've been there. And he then wrote a letter and asked if they would send it to the Kagan. Eventually it gets back to Constantinople, I believe. And they said, no, we're not sending this to the Kagan. And so then this Jew had to find another route to contact the king, the Kagan, the king of the Khazarian Empire. Eventually he gets it there through various traders and whatnot. And so established a correspondence between the sort of Sephardic Jewish community in Spain and the Jewish Kagan Empire there in Central Asia. And King Joseph tells him, yes, we converted to Judaism at this point. This is what we do. We need more rabbis, all this stuff that, he's an arch defender of the faith and all this. So that's a historical source. And then we have the Russian sources describing their sort of enterprises and dealings with the Khazarian Jews. So those are really, that's how we come to know everything about this particular group of people, which makes it why it's sort of been lost to history. Why does nobody know about Khazaria? Why does nobody know that there was a group of Turkish nomadic peoples that converted to Judaism to appease both the Muslim Empire, which was on its rise up, and the Byzantine Empire, which was also feuding with the Latin West, and said, no, we're Jewish, so we accept what both of you guys accept, and we disagree with what you guys then have as unique to your own claims. So moving forward here, we can look at Wikipedia has a whole thing on the Khazars. And so if you wanted to dive deeper into a lot of this stuff, you could absolutely feel free. Again, as I said, I'm going to try to stay away from some of the more controversial topics, but we can see, look, once they adopt, so we have 650 Irbis, right? The Kagan. This is the Kagan. Then we have 8th century. So now the 700s, Bulan. And King Bulan is who converts to Judaism. After King Bulan, all the names are Jewish: David, Joseph, Aaron, Benjamin, Manasseh, Zechariah, Obadiah, except then the 11th century, which we saw was more Greek with Georgios. I thought that was, again, it's interesting because you can see then their transition into their sort of Jewish, their Jewish practices. So where do we start here? Astride the majority of artery. Yes, Khazaria long served as a buffer state between the Byzantine Empire and both the nomads of the northern steppes and the Umayyad Caliphate and the Abbasid Caliphate, after serving the Byzantine Empire's proxy against the Sasanian Empire. The alliance was dropped around 900. Byzantium began to encourage the Alans to attack Khazaria and to weaken its hold on Crimea and the Caucasus, and sought to obtain again, the rising Rus, power to the north, yada, yada, yada. Okay, a lot of this stuff I've already talked about. So we're just going to move down here. And we're going to move into history. So this basically is summing up that sort of fall of that confederation that I already talked to you about. And then we have the rise of the Khazar state. And so the rise of the Khazar state, as I said, was around the 230-ish. So this is saying 230. Embryonic state of Khazaria began to form sometime after 230 when it emerged from the breakdown of the larger, remember, Göktürk Khaganate. And so the Khazarias saw themselves as the continuation of this Göktürk confederation, and that's why they called their leader the Kagan to continue the practices of the Göktürk Khaganate that was essentially undermined and destroyed by the Tang dynasty in China, because that's how far this thing stretched, all the way across Central Asia. The Ashina clan appeared on the scene by 552 when they overthrew the Rorans, established the Göktürk, yada, yada, yada. Okay, yada, yada, yada. Okay, the Khaganate of the Khazars thus took shape out of the ruins of this nomadic empire as it broke up under the pressure of the Tang dynasty's armies to the east, sometime between 630 and 650. After their conquest of the lower Volga region to the east, an area westwards between the Danube and the Dnieper, and their subjugation, sometime around 670, a properly constituted Khazar Khaganate emerges, becoming the westernmost successor state of the formidable Göktürk Khaganate after its disintegration. According to some Turkish name I don't know, the language of the Onogur Bulgar Federation was to become the lingua franca of Khazaria as it developed into what Les Gomiev called the Steppe Atlantis. Historians have often referred to this period of Khazar domination as the Pax Khazarica. since the state became an international trading hub, permitting Western Eurasian merchants safe transit across it to pursue their business without interference. The high status soon to be accorded to this empire to the north is attested by Ibn al-Bali's, which relates that the Sasanian Shah placed 3 thrones in his own, one for the king of China, a second for the king of Byzantium, and a third for the king of the Khazars. Yes, I mentioned that earlier. And so let's read a little bit then from the book here. Let me pull up a few maps. So again, I really like, again, looking at maps and looking at differences here. So here is Kazakhstan, modern-day Kazakhstan. Here's a contemporary map of what we're looking at here. And remember, it's between the Black Sea and this Caspian Sea. Caspian Sea once was referred to as the Khazarian Sea, that this is where they ruled. And so let's see here. Here's a little simpler map, how you can see how these rivers work. But there's one that was even better that I wanted to show. Where is that? Come on. So here, let's look at, so you see this, here is the capital city. You see this Itil, I-T-I-L, right here on this river. This is from the Volga, right? This is the capital city of the Khazarian Empire. And you have to see, again, why that city is so appropriately placed. So Sarkel, right here, Sarkel is one of their major cities. And then Itil is where the Kagan, and it's basically the capital of the city. What you don't see here is that there's actually a river that connects from where the Sarkel tributary is. It connects over to the Volga. So you can get from the Black Sea to the Caspian Sea on boat. You can get from the Black Sea to the Caspian Sea on boat. And that's why the Khazarian Empire was so powerful. You see, because you can get from the Black Sea to the Caspian Sea on boat. You can come from Finland. That's where I wanted to show some of these other maps. Look, you can come from Finland. You can come from the Finnish Gulf and get to the Caspian Sea. Where this map says Astrakhan, that would be Itil, or and that would be the capital of the Khazarian Empire. And this sort of Rostov-on-Don, that would probably be the Sarkel, that other, again, same general region here. So you can see they dominated flow north, east, west, and south. The Khazarian Empire was perfectly placed at the time of the Silk Road. Remember, this is the prominence of the Silk Road. So all trade between China and Europe has to come through the Khazarian Empire. It has to come through these Turkish Jewish, which then charge amounts and levies and taxes for the goods to pass through their territory. But they have the rivers. They have the perfect sort of highway system for trade. And that's also why the Rus were so upset. Because if you look at some of these maps, I mean, if you're the Rus, so here you have the Bulgarian Empire, right here. You have the Carpathian Mountains, the Danube. Then you have the Dnieper and the Dniester rivers. So the Dnieper is what goes through Kiev. That river goes all the way north, right? The Dnieper through Kiev goes all the way north into Finland, into north towards the St. Petersburg area, so you can get to the Arctic. So that's why the Rus, that's how they were having these conflicts with the Khazar, because they take these rivers and they would sack and pillage and they would destroy these various villages along the way. But when it came to all the Khazarian territories, they fought back and they became very wealthy and very formidable as opponents when trying to take their territory, their people, and whatnot. So, anyways, let's just kind of get into. I have a very variety. As you can see, this book's quite tagged up, so I can't read you all the tags I have, but let me just read a few here. So here is one from an Arab chronicler. Okay, I want to leave the map up so you guys can see where everything is, because I think the map helps so much. So here is an Arab chronicler describing the Khazars. The descriptions that have come down to us originate in hostile sources and cannot be taken at face value. As to the Khazars, an Arab chronicler writes, they are to the north of the inhabited earth towards the seventh clime, having over their heads the constellation of the plow. Their land is cold and wet. Accordingly, their complexions are white skin. Their eyes are blue, and their hair is flowing with predominantly reddish. Their bodies are large, and their natures are cold. Their general aspect is wild. And so I thought that's interesting how the Arab, again, one of the Muslims, described them. So let me then, here's a little section describing on the rise of this empire. The collapse of the Hun Empire after Attila's death left the power vacuum in Eastern Europe, of which once more wave after wave of nomadic hordes swept from the east to west. Prominent among them is the Uyghurs and the Avars. The Khazars, during most of this period, seem to be happily occupied raiding the rich Trans-Caucasus regions of Georgia and Armenia and collecting precious plunder. Yada, yada, yada. But before becoming a sovereign state, the Khazars still had to serve their apprenticeship under another short-lived power, the so-called West Turkish Empire. Again, that was that sort of Go-Turk kingdom. And so let me move forward here. We've kind of established a lot of that stuff. And then we have one here on... so this is an instance coming from Ibn Fadlan. So this is the Arab sources, one of the Muslim sources we have on the description of this Khazarian empire. And this is what he writes according to his experience, again, his firsthand experience. He traveled there, and then once he was in Baghdad, he would get sort of secondhand information, but he kind of brought forth a lot of the information that we have of them. So he says, yada, 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 regarding the Guz, which, again, if we look here, to the right of the Caspian Sea are the Guz people, the Ghuzz. They're also Turkic people that essentially become subservient to the Khazars. And he says, they are nomads. They have houses of felt. They stay for a while in one place and then they move on. One can see their tents dispersed here and there all over the place according to nomadic custom. Although they lead a hard life, they behave like donkeys that have lost their way. They have no religion which would link them to God, nor are they guided by reason. They do not worship anything. Instead, they call their headsmen lords. When one of them consults his chieftain, he asks, "O Lord, what shall I do for this or that matter?" The course of action they adopt is decided by taking counsel among themselves. But when they have decided on a measure and are ready to carry it through, even the humblest and lowliest among them can come and disrupt that decision. And then this is a description. This is an Arab Muslim describing the sexual practices of these Guz Turkish people. Their women wear no veils in the presence of their men or strangers, nor do the women cover any parts of their bodies in the presence of people. One day we stayed at the place of the Guz and were sitting around. His wife was also present. As we conversed, the woman uncovered her private parts and scratched them in front of us. We all saw it. Thereupon we covered our faces and say, "May God forgive me." The husband laughed at us, and he said to the interpreter, quote, "Tell them we uncover in your presence so as that you may see it, but must restrain yourselves. But it cannot be attained. This is better than when it is covered up and yet attainable. Adultery is alien to them. Yet when they discover that someone is an adulterer, they split him in two halves. Thus they do by bringing together the branches of two trees. They tie the adulterer to the branches, and then they let the trees go so as the man tied to them is then torn into two pieces." He also says they do this for instances of homosexuality. So, again, I thought that was pretty interesting there, too. So, guys, smash that like. Also, if you appreciate today's stream, feel free to send in a super chat using the Streamlabs link. If you prefer to use YouTube, feel free to use YouTube. Shout out to everybody over on The Rock. God bless you guys. Hope everybody's doing well over on The Rock. Okay, continuing on. There's so much good stuff in here. So continuing on, here's an example. Okay, so this is concerning the king of the Khazars. This is a description we have from the king of the Khazars, again by this particular Arab, Ibn Fadlan. And so he says, concerning the king of the Khazars, whose title is Kagan, he appears in public only once every 4 months. They called him the Great Kagan. His deputy is the Kagan Bek. He is the one who commands and supplies the armies, manages the affairs of state, appears in public and leads in war. The neighboring kings obey his orders. He enters every day into the presence of the Great Kagan. So you see here they have two kings. The way the Khazarians worked, they had two kings. One royal king, the Great Kagan, a sort of venerative figure, the mediator, the pharaoh, the mediator between the human realm and the divine realm. And then they had the Kagan Bek, which is basically the second king. He has to be in the presence of the Great Kagan, but then he's the one that does everything because the Great Kagan doesn't appear in public. And so it's the Kagan Bek who then makes the dealings with the other tribes. He's the one that goes to the war. He's the one that, he is the sort of Kagan, the hand of the Kagan, right? There's two Kagans in a way. There's the Great Kagan, then there's the vice president, the Kagan Bek. The Kagan Bek is really what people see most often. Only, again, every 4 months does the Great Kagan even come out in public, if you do see him there. The neighboring kings obey his orders, talking about the Kagan Bek, the sort of vice president. He enters every day into the presence of the Great Kagan with deference and modesty, barefooted, carrying a stick of wood in his hand. He makes obeisance, lights the stick, and when it has burned down, he sits down on the throne on the king's right. Next to him in rank is a man called the Kinder Kagan, and next to that one, the Joshalger Kagan. In this custom, the Great Kagan does not have social intercourse with people, and not to talk with them, and to admit nobody into his presence except those who have been mentioned. The power to bind or release or to mete out punishment and to govern the country belongs to his deputy. Again, that sort of vice president, the Kagan Bek. So it's the Kagan Bek that actually does everything. Very interesting political structure the Khazarians had. Here's another one on, let's see here. There's so much that we could get into. Here's a little section on the conversion. Of the Khazars. So again, as I summed up earlier, the main reason why the Khazarian Empire wanted to convert was they needed a monotheistic religion. They saw the fall of the Gokturkic Confederation in Central Asia, which was shamanistic, which was pagan. They saw the rise of Islam, which was a serious and rapid force. Like just overnight, Islam just grew and dominated the Arab and Persian world. And then they had Byzantium, and they had the Latin West and the Greek East. So they needed a monotheism, and they weren't really in favor of Zoroastrianism of the Persians. And so given that their greatest threats to existence were the Greek Christian Byzantines, the Byzantines, and then the Muslims of the various caliphates, that they thought, well, Judaism's the perfect middle ground. Here is Arthur Koestler in his book talking a little bit about this conversion. Though the Khazars court's conversion was no doubt politically motivated, it would still be absurd to imagine that they embraced overnight blindly a religion whose tenets were unknown to them. In fact, however, they had been well acquainted with Jews and their religious observances for at least a century before their conversion. Though the continued influx of refugees from religious persecution in Byzantium, and to a lesser extent from the countries of Asia Minor conquered by the Arabs, we know that Khazaria was a relatively civilized country among the barbarians of the north, yet not committed to either of the militant creeds, and so it became a natural haven for the periodic exodus of Jews under Byzantine rule. They're threatened or forced for conversion and potentially other pressures. Persecution in varied forms had started under Justinian I. That's at 527 to 565, and assumed particularly a vicious form under Heraclius in the 7th century, Heraclius in the 7th century, and then Leo III in the 8th, Basil and Leo IV in the 9th, Romanus in the 10th. Thus, Leo III, who ruled during the 2 decades immediately preceding the Khazar conversion to Judaism, quote, attempted to end the anomaly of the tolerated status of Jews at one blow by ordering all his Jewish subjects to be baptized. Although this implementation of the order seemed to have been rather ineffective, it led to the flight of a considerable number of Jews from Byzantium. And then this is insinuating that, quote, this is from a block quote he's using. Thus, many Jews took flight from the country of the Greeks to Khazaria. To Khazaria. And so this is a whole section on the conversion, moving forward, yada, yada, yada. Okay. So here's, in summing up the Hebrew sources, so here's the Hebrew sources on the Khazars. Summing up the Hebrew sources on the Khazars that have come down to us, one senses a mixed reaction of enthusiasm, skepticism, and above all, bewilderment. A warrior nation of Turkish Jews must have seemed to the rabbis as strange as a circumcised unicorn. During 1,000 years of dispersion, the Jews had forgotten what it was like to have a king and a country. The Messiah was more real to them than the Kagan. As a postscript to the Arab and Hebrew sources relating to the conversion, it should be mentioned that the apparently earliest Christian sources antedates them both. At some date earlier than 864, the Westphalian monk Christian Dürthmer of Aquitania wrote a Latin treatise, Expositio in Evangelium Mate, in which he reports that, quote, there exist people under the sky in regions where no Christians can be found, whose name is Gog and Magog, who are Huns. Among them is one called Khazari, who are circumcised and observe Judaism in its entirety. This remark occurs appropriate of Matthew 24:14, which has no apparent bearing on it. And yeah, okay. So here's the fun part then. The gentleman that was sent, the bishop that was sent to actually convert the Khazarians was Saint Kirill, or what becomes the Cyrillic alphabet. Saint Kirill, Saint Cyril, he's the one, again, that is sent by the Byzantine Empire to try to go convert the Khazarians to Christianity, to Orthodox Christianity. However, they reject, not due to his exquisite arguments, but just as a sort of political measure that they could find a perfect in-between. And so I wanted to read this to you guys real quick. At about the same time when Dürthmer wrote down that he knew from hearsay about the Jewish Khazars, a famed Christian missionary sent by the Byzantine emperor attempted to convert them to Christianity. He was no less a figure than that of Saint Kirill, the apostle of the Slavs, alleged designer of the Cyrillic alphabet. He and his elder brother, Saint Methodius, were entrusted with this and other proselytizing missions by the Emperor Michael III on the advice of the Patriarch Photius, himself apparently of Khazar descent. For it is reported that the emperor once called him in anger a Khazar face. Oh, Patriarch Photius was Khazarian. Kirill's proselytizing efforts seem to have been successful among the Slavonic people in Eastern Europe, but not among the Khazars. He traveled to their country via Cherson in the Crimea. In Cherson, he is said to have spent 6 months learning Hebrew in preparation for his mission. He then took the Khazarian way, the Don-Volga portage, to Idel. Again, that city leading right into the Caspian Sea, right at the mouth of the Volga, and the Caspian Sea was their capital, Idel. And from there traveled along the Caspian to meet the Kagan. It is not said where. The usual theological disputations followed, but they had little impact on the Khazar Jews. Even the adulatory Vitae Constantine, Kirill's original name, says only that Kirill made a good impression on the Kagan, that a few people were baptized and 200 Christian prisoners were released by the Kagan as a gesture of goodwill. It was the least he could do for the emperor's envoy, who had gone to so much trouble. There is a curious sidelight thrown on the story by students of Slavonic philology. Kirill is credited by tradition not only with having devised the Cyrillic alphabet, but also the Glagolitic alphabet. The latter, according to Burson, was used in Croatia to the 17th century. Its indebtedness to the Hebrew alphabet in at least 11 characters, representing in part the Slavonic sounds, has long been recognized. This seems to confirm, as what had said earlier about the influence of the Hebrew alphabet in spreading literacy among the neighbors of the Khazarians. Interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff. Now we're going to get into the decline of the empire. So we are going to be getting into the decline of the Khazarian Empire now. Guys, smash that like, and if you appreciate, please send in a super chat. And I will get to all those here in just a few. Again, shout out to the sponsored stream by Pim Orsaz. Next one says, so here's talking about their decline and who is responsible for the decline of the Khazarians other than the Russians, the Slavs. The particular brand of Vikings, which the Byzantines called the Rus, were called Varangians by the Arab chroniclers. The most probable derivation of Rus, according to Toynbee, is from the Swedish word rotor, meaning rowers. As for the Varangian, it was used by the Arabs and also the Russian primary chronicle to designate Norsemen and Scandinavians. The Baltic was actually called by them the Varangian Sea. Although the branch of Vikings originated from the eastern Sweden, as a distinct from the Norwegians and the Danes who raided Western Europe, their advance followed the same pattern. It was seasonal. It was based on strategically placed islands which served as strongholds, armories, and supply bases for attacks on the mainland. And its nature evolved, where conditions were favorable, from predatory raids and forced commerce to more or less permanent settlements and ultimately an amalgamation with the conquered native populations. Thus, the Viking penetration of Ireland started with the seizure of the island of Recru or Lambay in Dublin Bay. England was invaded from the Isle of Thanet. Penetration from the continent started with the conquest of the islands of Walcheren. At the eastern extreme of Europe, the Northmen were following the same blueprint for conquest. After crossing the Baltic and the Gulf of Finland, they sailed up the river of the Volkhov into Lake Ilmen, south of Leningrad, where they found a convenient island, the Holmgard of the Icelandic sagas. On this, they built a settlement, which eventually grew into the city of Novgorod, where from here they forayed on southward on the great gateways of the Volga into the Caspian and on the Dnieper into the Black Sea. The former route led through the countries of the militant Bulgars and Khazars, the latter across the territories of various Slavonic tribes who inhabited the northwestern outskirts of the Khazarian Empire and paid tribute to the Kagan. The Pauline in the religion of Kiev, south of Moscow, yada, yada, yada. These Slavs seem to have developed advanced methods of agriculture and were apparently more of a timid disposition than their Turkish neighbors on the Volga. For, as Barry put it, they became the natural prey. The Slavic were the natural prey. These eventually came to prefer the Dnieper. So these Scandinavian raiders eventually came to prefer the Dnieper in spite of its dangerous cataracts to the Volga and the Don. It was the Dnieper which became, quote, the great waterway of the Nordic sagas, from the Baltic to the Black Sea and thus to Constantinople. They even gave Scandinavian names to the 7 major cataracts, duplicating their Slavonic names. Okay, yada, yada, yada. Moving on. We get it. It's funny, the Muslims did not like the Russians. They did not like the Rus. They considered them animalistic and just as depraved as the Khazarians and the Turkic tribes. I thought that was funny. They considered them absolutely filthy. So that Ibn Fadlan, the Arabian, the Muslim, that we have one of the main sources from, one of the main sources on the Khazarians says that the Slavs are the filthiest creatures of the Lord. Okay, moving on. Anyways, here we go. Sarkel was built just in time. It enabled them. So what's Sarkel? Remember, it's that one city that we saw. See it right here, right in the middle, Sarkel. See that right where all the rivers come together, Sarkel. And then we have Atoll to the right here in this map. Sarkel's right where all the rivers meet. So Sarkel was built just in time, enabled them to control the movements of the Rus flotillas along the lower reaches of the Don and the Don-Volga portage. So the Don-Volga portage, by and large, it seems that during the first century of their presence on the scene, the plundering raids of the Rus were mainly directed against Byzantium, where obviously richer plunder was to be had, whereas their relations with the Khazars were essentially on a trading basis, though not without friction and intermittent clashes. At any rate, the Khazars were able to control the Rus trade routes and so levy a 10% tax on all cargoes passing through their country to Byzantium and to the Muslim lands. They also exerted some cultural influence on the Northmen, who, for their violent ways, had a naive willingness to learn from the people with whom they came in contact. The extent of this influence is indicated by the adoption of the title Kagan by the early Rus rulers of Novgorod. This is confirmed by both Byzantine and Arab sources. For instance, Ibn Rusta, after describing the island on which Novgorod was built, states, quote, "They have a king who is called Kagan Rus." Moreover, Ibn Fadlan reports that the Kagan Rus has a general who leads the army and represents him to the people. Zeki Validi has pointed out that such delegation of the army command was unknown among the Germanic people of the north, where the king must be the foremost warrior. Validi concludes that the Rus obviously imitated the Khazar system of a twin kingship or rule. This is not unlikely in view of the fact that the Khazars were the most prosperous and culturally advanced people with whom the Rus in these early stages of their conquest made territorial contact. And that contact must have been fairly intense, since there was a colony of Rus merchants in Idil, and also a community of Khazar Jews in Kiev. It is said to report that this context that more than 1,000 years after the events under discussion, the Soviet regime has done its best to expunge the memory of the Khazars' historic role and cultural achievements. On January 12, 1952, the Times carried the following news item. Early Russian culture belittled, Soviet historian debunked. Anyways, it goes on to this Khazar, talking about the sort of speculative aspects of the Khazarian kingdom and all this stuff. I'm not going to read it. It's multiple pages long. Anywho. So we can now resume the story of the Rus' ascent to power where we left off. The bloodless annexation of Kiev by Rurik's men around the AD 862. Remember, 740, Khazaria converts to Judaism. 630, Khazarian Turkish nomadic people start to take control of this central steppe area of what we call southern Russia, right? And it's in 960 that their capital city is destroyed by Sviatoslav, the Grand Prince of Kiev, okay? So in 862, this is also the approximate date when the Magyars were pushed westward by the Pechenegs, and that's why the Magyars, they then form what we call modern-day Hungary. That's where this group, the Magyars, another Turkish group, that's where they ended up residing. So the Magyars were pushed westward by the Pechenegs, thus depriving the Khazars of protection from their western flank. So the group, the Magyars, who were protecting the Khazars from the Rus on the west, they move even further west. They're no longer there. They're now in what we would consider modern-day Hungary and Poland. They're on the other side. And so now the western flank of the Khazarian Empire is totally exposed for the Rus. It may explain why the Rus could gain control of Kiev so easily. But the weakening of the Khazar military exposed the Byzantines, too, to the attack of the Rus. Close to this date is when the Rus settled in Kiev. Their ships sailing down the Dnieper across the Black Sea and attacked Constantinople. Bury has described this event with much gusto. In the month of June 860, Emperor Michael III, with all his forces, was marching against the Saracens. He had probably gone far when receiving the amazing tidings which recalled him with all speed to Constantinople. A Russian host had sailed across the Black Sea in 200 boats, entered the Bosphorus, plundered the monasteries and suburbs on its banks, and overrun the island of the princes. The inhabitants of the city were utterly demoralized by the sudden horror of the danger of their own impotence. The troops, which were usually stationed in the neighborhood of the city, were far away with the emperor, and the fleet was absent. Having wrought wreck and ruins in the suburbs, the barbarians, the Russians, the Slavs, prepared to attack the city of Constantinople. At this crisis, the learned patriarch Photius rose to the occasion. He undertook the task of restoring the moral courage of his fellow citizens. He expressed the general feeling that he felt on the incongruity that the imperial city, the queen of almost all the world, should be mocked by a band of slaves, a mean and barbarous crowd. But the populace was perhaps more impressed and consoled when he resorted to the ecclesiastical process which he had been used efficaciously at previous sieges. The precious garment of the Virgin Mary was borne in the procession round the walls of the city, and it was believed that it was dipped in the waters of the sea for the purpose of raising a storm of wind. No storm arose, but soon afterwards the Russians began to retreat from Constantinople, and perhaps there were not many among the joyful citizens who did not impute their relief to the direct intervention from the Theotokos, the Queen of Heaven. We may add for the sake that the, quote, learned patriarch Photius, whose eloquence saved the imperial city, was none other than a Khazar face, who had sent St. Kirill on his proselytizing mission. As for the Rus retreat, it was caused by the hurried return of the Greek army and fleet, but, quote, Khazar face had saved morale among the populace during the agonizing period of waiting. And so how many of you guys know that there is a Khazarian prince? So here's the pitch and eggs who drove the Magyars. Here's Theodoria of Khazaria. Theodoria, the second wife of Justinian II. So Justinian II, here's Justinian II. So we're talking, he reigned from 685 to 695. He married one of the daughters of the Kagans, of the Khazaria, who became Theodora of Khazaria. So again, I thought that was cool. How many people knew that? So Justinian II married a Khazarian woman. This was another Khazarian princess, Titztak. She was baptized Irene, and she was a Khazarian princess who married Constantine V. And then we have Leo III, the Assyrian. He's also referred to as Leo, or no, his son. His son was Leo the Khazar. So Leo the Assyrian, I'm pretty sure he had a child with Titzak, and that Leo the IV was the Khazar. He was the emperor of the Byzantine Empire. Emperor of the Byzantine. This was an iconoclast. He was iconoclast. So these Leos, they were part of the force to try to get rid of icons in the Orthodox Church. Can you believe that? They were part of the process to get rid of icons in the Orthodox Church. So I thought that's really interesting. Most people have no idea. And then here's King Bulan. Again, if you wanted to look that up. King Bulan, he's the king, the Kagan, that converts them to Judaism. And here's Sviatoslav I, the Grand Prince of Kiev, who sacks Idol. Again, so he's famous for his persistent campaigns in the east and south, which precipitated the collapse of two great powers in Eastern Europe, Khazaria and the First Bulgarian Empire. He also conquered numerous East Slavic tribes. He defeated the Alans and attacked the Vulgar Bulgars, and at times was allied with the Pechenegs and the Magyars, or quote-unquote the Hungarians. His decade-long reign over the Kievian Rus was marked by rapid expansion into the Volga River Valley, the Pontic Steppe, and the Balkans. By the end of his short life, Sviatoslav carved out for himself the largest state in Europe, eventually moving his capital in 969 from Kiev to Pereyatslavets, identified as the modern village of Nufaru in Romania on the Danube. In contrast with his mother's conversion to Christianity, Sviatoslav remained a staunch pagan all his life. Due to his abrupt death in ambush, his conquests, for the most part, were not consolidated into a functioning empire, while the failure to establish a stable succession led to fratricidal feud among the three sons, resulting in two of them being killed. Okay. Anyways, let's continue on here. We got more to get into. So we just read a little bit about so leading up to the collapse of the Khazarian, we can say that for the next 200 years, so we're talking in the 800s, the Byzantine-Russians relations alternated between armed conflict and treaties of friendship. There were wars waged in 860, the Siege of Constantinople, 907, 941, 944, 969 through 71, and treaties concluded in 838, 839, 861, 911, 945, 957, and 971. About the contents of these more or less secret agreements we know little about, but even what we know shows the bewildering complexity of the game. A few years after the siege of Constantinople, the Patriarch Photius reports that the Rus sent ambassadors to Constantinople, and according to the Byzantine formula for pressurized proselytizing, quote, besought the emperor for Christian baptism. Among these consequences was the recruiting of Scandinavian sailors into the Byzantine fleet. By 902, there were 700 of them, 700 Slavic men in the Byzantine navy. That's a considerable amount. Another development was the famous Varangian Guard, an elite corps of Rus and other Nordic mercenaries, including even Englishmen. In the treatises of 945 and 971, the Russian rulers of the Principality of Kiev undertook to supply the Byzantine Empire with troops on request. And Constantine Porphyrogenitus' day, i.e. the middle of the 10th century, Rus fleets on the Bosphorus were a customary sight. They no longer came to lay siege on Constantinople, but to sell their wares. Trade was meticulously well regulated, according to the Russian Chronicle. It was agreed in the treatises of 907 and 911 that the Rus visitors should enter Constantinople through one city gate only, not more than 50 at a time, and they would be escorted by city officials. So we see then that the Byzantines are beginning to grow an alliance with the Rus, with the Slavic peoples, which had been historically been a nuisance both to the Greeks and to the Khazarians. But as the Khazarians began to sort of fall in power due to their own sort of confederacy or their own empire falling apart, like the Magyars moving into what would be modern-day Hungary, we see the Byzantines form an alliance with the Rus, and the Rus grow in dominance because now they have a main trade partner, the Byzantine Empire. And so eventually, once Vladimir the Great then converts, it's it's over by then. That now you have both the Byzantine Empire and the Rus on the exact same team. So it talks about Olga was the mother of Sviatoslav. So Sviatoslav, the Slavic guy who destroys Atil, right? Again, looking at our map here, Atil is right here, right? We have Sarkel and we have Atil. Sarkel and Atil. Atil, to the right, is their capital city. That's the one that's sacked by Sviatoslav. Sviatoslav's mother, Olga, was a Nordic pagan who converted to Christianity. And so I'll tell you a little about it. Olga's baptism in her state visit to Constantine. So Olga Helga was a formidable Scandinavian. She was the widow of Prince Igor and supposedly son of Rurik, whom the Russian chronicle describes as a greedy, foolish, and sadistic ruler. In 941, he attacked the Byzantines with a large fleet, and of the people they captured, some they butchered, others they set up as targets and they shot arrows at them. Some they seized upon, and after binding their hands behind their backs, they drove iron nails through their skulls. Many sacred churches they gave to flames. So Olga eventually she sort of revenged the death of her husband, but after she was bloodlust, so it seemed Olga's bloodlust seemed truly insatiable until she was baptized. Eventually, again, she decided to go to Constantinople, and she got officially baptized. From that day onward, the chronicle informs us that she became, quote, the precursor of Christian Russia, even as daybreak precedes the sun, and as the dawn precedes the day. For she, Olga, shone like the moon by night, and she was radiant among the infidels like a pearl in the mire. In due course, she was canonized as the first Russian saint of the Orthodox Church, Saint Olga, the mother of Sviatoslav, who then was destroyed or sacked that main capital city of Khazaria. I wanted to read a little bit about Vladimir. Let me see if I can even find that. There's another really interesting instance where, here we go. Looking at our graph here, you see how these rivers kind of come, again, they form this X. Well, the Don River, the Rus came down the Dnieper River into the Black Sea, and they sailed into these rivers, again, into the Khazarian Empire, and got the permission of the Kagan. They got permission of the Kagan to go into the Caspian Sea, which again at that time was called the Khazarian Sea, and they wanted to sail to the opposite side. They wanted to go to the opposite side again. So we're talking to the far right here, to this eastern edge of the Caspian Sea, and they wanted to sack. And they promised the Kagan that they would give them some of their booty when they got to, so they would go. They wanted the Kagan's permission to go sack all these other people who were mostly Muslims at this point. So they were all Muslims. They wanted to go sack these Muslims, take their women, kill their men, and take all their money and their goods. And then they promised the Kagan that they would give some of it to him on their way back through those river systems, back through the Volga. Well, some of the right-hand people, some of the closest people inside the imperial court of the Kagan in Khazaria were all Muslims. Islam had a sort of high, there was more Muslims in Khazaria than there were Christians. That's certainly true. So they had a considerable amount of Muslims, and Muslims, they rose high in prominence. I mean, there was one chronicler, I forget if it was a Christian or a Jewish chronicler that went through Khazaria that complained that the minaret, the sort of top of the mosque, a Muslim mosque, was the highest point in the Khazarian Empire in Adil or that Idil, that main capital city. So the tallest building in the Khazarian capital city was in fact a mosque. And so on the way back, the Russians, they went and sacked all these people, but the Kagan, according to one source, the Muslims, and he had a right-hand man that was a Muslim, he was very upset with the Kagan giving him permission to sack and kill his brothers and sisters. Again, not that he knew these people, but the Muslims on the other side of the Caspian Sea. So he pleaded to the Kagan to allow the Muslims within the Khazarian Empire to go attack the Russians, the Rus, on their way back into the Volga. And that's exactly what they did, and they basically annihilated those Russian people, the Russian men. I think I remember reading it in here. It talked about how that the Russians were so totally, one, they weren't ready for it. I mean, they had just spent like months destroying and warring with all these Muslim people. They were expecting to be able to come back, give the Kagan, 10-20% of what they had, and then be able to be on their way. However, the Muslims within the Khazarian Empire said, no, let us have at him. So according to legend, the Kagan just let the Muslims have his ships, and they were able to go fight the Russians inside the Caspian Sea. And as you can see, if you're inside the Caspian Sea, there's not a whole lot of places to go. And so they cornered the Russians, and they killed most of them. There was a few instances of survivors that somehow jumped ship the Russians, and they somehow got their way back to wherever they were from. But pretty interesting story nonetheless. Here it is. So Masoudi's account. So this is one of the Muslims accounting for this instance that I just described to you, these Muslims attacking and killing these Russians that were getting into the Caspian Sea. He says, Masoudi's account on the 1912-1913 Russian Rus incursion into the Caspian ends with the words, quote, "There has been no repetition on the part of the Rus of what we have described since that year." And so... yeah. So here's a description. So the relations with the caliphate were peaceful, yet nevertheless precarious as an incident. So there's a Muslim there, again, pleading for the Kagan to fight back against these Russians. It says Masoudi's account provides a glimpse of the dilemma of several dilemmas confronting the Khazar leadership. They may not have been duly worried about the misfortune suffered by some of the people on the Caspian shores, but if this predatory Rus, after gaining control of Kiev and the Dnieper, were to establish a foothold on the Volga, moreover, another Rus raid into the Caspian might bring down the wrath of the caliphate, not on the Rus themselves, who were beyond its reach, but on the innocent, or the Khazars. Relations with the caliphate were peaceful, yet nevertheless precarious, as an incident reported by Ibn Fanlan indicates. The Rus raid, described by Masoudi, took place in 1912 and 13. Ibn Fanlan's mission to Bulgar was in 1921 and 1921 to 22. His account on the incident in question is as follows. The Muslims in the city of Idil have a cathedral, a mosque, where they prayed and attended on Fridays. It was a high minaret of several criers who call for prayer. When the king of the Khazars was informed that the Muslims had destroyed the synagogue, which was in Dar al-Bunaj, identified place in Muslim territory, he gave orders to destroy the minaret, and he killed the muezzins. And he said, quote, "If I had not feared that not a synagogue would be left in the lands of Islam, but would be destroyed, I would have destroyed all the mosques here too." This episode testifies to a nice feeling for the strategy of mutual deterrence, and the dangers of escalation also shows once more that the Khazar rulers felt emotionally committed to the fate of Jews in other parts of the world. So, interesting stuff there. In due course, though, the Rus gained a foothold in the Caspian Sea, in the Caspian region, and were able to hold it for a year. Basically, modern-day Azerbaijan, it looked like. So then we're talking about Prince Sviatoslav of Kiev and his sacking of Idil, their sort of main city. We have already heard that he was stepping light as a leopard and that he undertook many campaigns, talking about Sviatoslav. In fact, he spent most of his reign campaigning. In spite of the constant entreaties of his mother, he refused to be baptized, quote, because it would make him the laughingstock of his subjects, unquote. The Russian Chronicle also tells us that on his expeditions, he carried neither wagons nor cooking utensils, and he boiled no meat, but cut off small strips of horse flesh, game or beef, and ate it as it roasted on the coals. Nor did he have a tent, but he would spread out a horse blanket under him, and sat his saddle under his head. And all his retinue did likewise. When he attacked the enemy, he scorned doing it by stealth, but instead sent messengers ahead announcing, "I am coming upon you." To the campaign against the Khazars, the chronicler devotes only a few lines, and the laconic tone which is usually adopts in the reporting of an armed conflict. Sviatoslav went to Oka on the Volga, and coming in contact with the Scythians, a Slavonic tribe, that's the Vyatichians, a Slavonic tribe inhabiting the region of modern-day Moscow. He inquired of them to whom they paid tribute. They made answer that they paid a silver piece per plowshare to the Khazars. When the Khazars, heard of his approach, they went out to meet him with their prince, the Kagan, and the armies came to blows. When the battle thus took place, Sviatoslav defeated the Khazars and took their city of Belia Zahea. I don't even know. That was the Slavonic name for Sarkel, the famed Khazar fortress on the Don. So that's Sarkel. That's the center. That's that center city, right where all the rivers meet, the Don and the Volga, access to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, right there. So Sviatoslav took Sarkel from the Khazarians, and then he went and he sacks Idil. So several historians have regarded the victory of Sviatoslav as the ending of Khazaria, which, as we will see, is demonstrably wrong. The destruction of Sarkel in 1965 signaled the end of the Khazarian Empire, not the Khazar state. In 1918 signaled the end of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but not of Austria as a nation. Khazar control of the far-flung Slavonic tribes, which, as we have seen, stretched to the vicinity of Moscow, had now come to a definite end, but the Khazar heartland between the Caucasus of the Don and the Volga remained intact. The approaches of the Caspian Sea remained closed to the Rus, and we hear of no further attempt on their part to force their way to it. As Toynbee pointedly remarks, the Rus succeeded in destroying the Khazar steppe empire, but the only Khazar territory they acquired was on the Taman Peninsula, facing Crimea, and this gain was ephemeral. It was not till halfway through the 16th century that the Muscovites made a permanent conquest for Russia of the river Volga. So Sviatoslav and his sacking of Idil is questioned to what degree. If you look up like the Wikipedia, it's going to tell you that that's exactly what happened. Khazar Hungarians, rise of the Rus and the Khazarian state, aftermath and impact. So the Khazar kingdom did not wholly succumb to Sviatoslav's campaign, but lingered on until 224. So it's debate. It's still a debated topic, but who knows? The Byzantine scholar then accuses the Jews of having crucified God, and the Roman Catholics, in much milder terms, of having, quote, modified the rites after these, yada, yada, yada. So Vladimir the Great appears only half convinced when pressed to be baptized. He replies, "I shall wait a little longer." He then sends his own convoys, 10 good and wise men, to various countries to observe their religious practices. In due time, this commission inquiry reports that the Byzantium service is, quote, fairer than the ceremonies of all other nations, and we knew not whether we were in heaven or on earth. But Vladimir still hesitated, and the Chronicle states that, quote, after a year had passed, in 988, Vladimir proceeded with an armed force against Cherson, a Greek city. The valiant Chersonese refused to surrender. Vladimir's troops constructed earthworks directed at the city walls, but the Chersonese dug a tunnel under the city wall, stole the heaped up earth, and carried it into the city where they piled it up. Then a traitor shot an arrow into the Rus camp with the message, "There are springs behind you to the east, from which water flows in pipes. Dig down and cut them off." When Vladimir received this information, he raised his eyes to heaven and vowed that if this hope was realized, he would be baptized. He succeeded in cutting off the city's water supply, and Cherson surrendered. Thereupon, Vladimir, apparently forgetting his vow, sent messengers to the emperors Basil and Constantine, joint rulers at the time, saying, "Behold, I have captured your glorious city. I have also heard that you have an unwedded sister. Unless you give her to me as wife, I shall deal with your own city as I have with Cherson." The emperors replied, "If you are baptized, you shall have her to wife, inherit the kingdom of God, and be our companion in the faith." And so it came to pass, Vladimir at long last accepted baptism and married the Byzantine princess Anna. A few years later, Greek Christianity became the official religion not only of the rulers, but of the Russian people. And from 1037 onward, the Russian church has governed by the Patriarch of Constantinople. Good stuff there. Let's see here. So that basically, guys, I think that's going to do most of this stream. I didn't even get into the whole discussion here in this book. There's a whole section on the Khazars and their conversion, and this is a good book. If you haven't read the Silk Road by Peter Frankopan, I recommend it. It's a good overview of the Silk Road and history and all that different stuff. So yeah, I definitely recommend it. Let's see if there's anything else I need to go through. I think that's basically it, guys. Smash that like if you guys can. Hope everybody enjoyed today's stream. Again, this was a sponsored stream. Special shout out to Pim. Special shout out to Pim Orsos. Pim Orsos is who sponsored today's stream. So I hope everybody enjoyed it. Again, smash that like. If you'd like to support with a super chat, feel free to send those in. I'm now going to read those. And so remember, the controversial part of today's presentation is then what happened to the Khazarian Jews. If Khazaria was this massive Turkish nomadic empire that occupied such a central and important role, basically from the 600s until the end of the 900s, but then existed until Genghis Khan and the Mongols totally wiped any remnant of the Khazarian Empire off the central steppes, where did they all go? And that's where the controversial debate emerges, is we know that some of them went to Eastern Europe. The debated question is to what degree, to what number did the Khazarian Jews flee into Eastern Europe? And to what degree are those Turkish nomadic Jews Ashkenazi Jews? I'll leave that to you guys. I'll leave you do your own research. You read your own books. You come to your own conclusions. I know officially, according to both the State of Israel, according to Wikipedia, and according to the officials that be, the argument and argumentation put forth by Arthur Koestler, the Hungarian Jew who wrote the 13th Tribe, that is pure conjecture and a speculative theory that has no basis. So that is their opinion. That is their official stance. You come up with your own conclusion. I'll let you do that. You do your own research. I'm here to just provide you with the basis of the historical evidence and understanding of the Khazarian Empire and how this thing existed and how it lasted. So I hope this was useful. I hope it sort of painted and connected some dots. I love history and I love learning more about history, and I really want to thank Pim for bringing my attention to diving a little bit deeper into this topic that it's only going to prove useful, certainly for future topics as well. So God bless you, Pim Orsos, for sponsoring today's stream, and God bless all you guys. Smash that like, and now let's get into some super chats here. So first super chat comes from The Real Cooter Brown. Shout out to The Real Cooter Brown. Throws in $6 and says, great stream tonight, DPH. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you so much, Real Cooter Brown. So I appreciate that. I see some people asking if genetic evidence agreed with the book. I'll let you guys do your own research. It depends on who you ask. Depends on which geneticist and which genetic tests. So I'll leave that for you guys to look into. I am going to make no public opinion or comment on that controversial topic of genetic. I'll let geneticists or your own research, you look into it. Look into potentially which who's for and against and what their arguments are. and you can come up with your own conclusions. But yes, disconal docs. Look into your guys' own research regarding the test and stuff. So next super chat comes from Ogdeem. Throws in 1026. Shout out to Ogdeem and says, I've listened to maybe 10 of your shows and never dropped in to say thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Ogdeem, for the 1026, brother. I'm glad that you've been listening to some of the streams, and I hope you've been enjoying the content. I do want to say, guys, for a good overview on today's topic, do use this video, this YouTube video that I'm sharing in the live chat. This is a good YouTube video for anybody who wants to get some of this sort of historical overview. Again, like Douglas Miller's comment on Rockfin, it's too simplistic, bro. It's too simplistic. Like things are more complicated than that. I just want to say. So, thank you very much, Ogdeem, for the 1026, and really appreciate you tuning in here live and being able to participate in a live stream. Next super chat comes from the one and only Frankie D. Shout out to Frankie D. And he says, informative stream, brother. Very interesting history. I wish I would have learned this rich Christian history earlier. Byzantine history is our history. The relationship between the Kiev Rus and the Byzantium still impacts the world today. God bless. It really does. It really does. And it's so interesting to see, again, the absolutely important place the Khazars played. That it's very likely that history would totally be different if the Khazars were not there to stop the Muslim conquest in both the first Arab and second Arab-Khazar war. So thank God for the Khazars to stop the Arabs from moving through the Caucasus and attacking Europe from the east. That was their plan. So that was a major benefit to the history of Christianity and the history of Europe. So thank you for Khazar there. But it's interesting how Byzantium first was friendly with Khazaria because they helped buffer the Persian Empire. And then they helped slow down all the Rus, the Kievan Rus, and all the Slavic tribes and the Bulgars. And then the Rus start growing in prominence. And Byzantium, maybe we'll make an agreement with you guys. And obviously it was the right move because we see how the Rus obviously end up becoming more powerful than the Khazars eventually, and the Khazarian Empire falling apart. The Rus growing in providence, the Rus converting to Christianity, and they're growing their empire, whereas Khazars then lose their empire, and then they basically flee, and they flee into the lands of the Magyars, a group that they had dominated previously, and now they're asking them for refuge a couple hundred years later. So it's pretty interesting to see. But yeah, history is fascinating, and I think so many people just don't have a historical perspective, and it's very easy to not have nuance in one's personal opinion and one's perspective when you don't know history. And so if you don't have nuance, it's going to be really hard to see the bigger picture. You need to be specific. You need to have nuance. You need to look for details. And so I think this is a very fascinating topic, and I'm blown away that there's so much of history that we're not told. And so again, special shout out to Pim Orsos for today's stream. So thank you very much, Frankie D. God bless you, brother. I hope you're doing well. Hope you and your family are doing well. Guys, smash that like. Next super chat comes in from Candace Spence. Shout out to Candace Spence over in Canada. Greetings from Canada, Patrick, she says. Wish I could donate more. Thank you for your tireless effort, and I pray that you will achieve your goals. God bless you and your family. Well, thank you so much, Candace Spence. Gosh, we haven't talked in a minute. I hope you've made your move. I hope you're in your new location at the just north of the border there and found your Orthodox community. So God bless you, Candace Spence. So great you could tune in. Thank you so much for a $50 super chat. Very generous, Candace Spence. Thank you very much, Candace Spence, with the $50 super chat. Again says, Greetings from Canada, Patrick. Wish I could donate more. Oh, it's all good. Thank you so much. Thank you for the tireless effort, and I pray that you will achieve your goals. God bless you and your family. God bless you and your family, Candace Spence. Hope you're doing well. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Next super chat comes from Rachel Wilson and Andrew. Shout out to Rachel Wilson. She throws in $5. Thank you so much, Rachel. Jeez, you don't need to support or super chat me. That's very kind. That's very, very kind, Rachel. Thank you very, very much. She says, Andrew and I are loving the streams. Thank you. Well, thank you guys. Shout out to the Crucible. Shout out to Rachel Wilson and Andrew Wilson. God bless you guys. God bless your family. Again, it was a pleasure to meet you and grow our friendship in person over in Montana. So God bless you guys. Hope you're doing well. And it looks like last super chat comes from Zorid. Zorid throws in $10 and says, great topic. We definitely don't hear about any of this in school. No, you don't hear about any of this in school. You really don't hear a lot about anything in school anymore. School, as we know, is an indoctrination camp, but I like to think of myself as an adult learner. You know, that's what I do to make content, and I read books. And this was a topic I didn't know that much about. So I'm really excited to be able to, dive deep into this topic, and grow in my perspective of world history and the circumstances of events. Because, again, I'm not making any argument in regards to these Khazarian Jew and the more controversial aspects about this empire. But I will say, once you start looking into the diaspora and where did the Khazarian Jews go, it gets very interesting. It gets very interesting stuff, and some of the linguistic connections. It's worth looking into. So, So thanks, Zorid. I really appreciate the $10 super chat. And so now looks like that's going to be all the super chats. Guys, please smash that like if you can. Again, special shout out to Pim Orsos for today's sponsoring of today's stream. Really appreciate you guys. God bless everybody. Smash that like. Let me share that over on. Shout out to everybody over on The Rock. Shout out to everybody over on the YouTube. Good night, good Green Feathers. God bless you, brother. Thank you for helping me tonight with the live chat. I'm sure you probably had to ban some people. I had no focus on it, so I really appreciate the Green Feathers. Go follow the Green Feathers. Support his stuff. Thank you so much, the Green Feathers, for helping me tonight. So I just want to say before hopping off here, guys, really appreciate all the support. Special shout out again to all the super chatters. Special shout out to Zorid, to the Rachel Wilson and Andrew Wilson. God bless you both and your family. Shout out to the Candace Spence. Candace Spence, God bless you. Such a very generous super chat, and hope you've made your move and everything's going well. Shout out to the Frankie D. Shout out to the Ogdeem. Shout out to the Real Cooter Brown. God bless you all. And that's going to do it for tonight, guys. That is my stream on Khazaria, a forgotten empire that I hope is forgotten no more. That if I did my job tonight, you should have a little bit of a better historical perspective. So with that being said, smash that like. I will be back. I'll be back probably Friday. I got things I got to do. Thursday's no go. Maybe tomorrow. I don't know. I don't have a topic set up, so no planned stream tomorrow. But it's possible I could hop on for a stream tomorrow, and no stream Thursday. So I'll either see you tomorrow or Friday. So as always, until then,